It's my great pleasure to introduce today our featured speaker, Nat Cheshire. I want to thank Nat very much for making the effort to come down. It's a full attendance room today, so he needs little introduction. Nat works with his father Pip at Cheshire Architects in Auckland and 24 other designers as well, and is responsible for some amazing new development in Auckland. So I hope you're going to get a lot of inspiration today. Some of the projects that Nat's been working on in Auckland include Britomart and the City Works Depot, which has really changed the face of Auckland. It's such a great space, and I think really inspiring to all. So Nat's going to cover a whole range of subjects today around insatiable hunger for technology. I think those were the words he was using as walking around today at the exhibition, and also energy and exhaustion. How you can use these things to inspire and innovate. So I'll just ask you all to put your hands together and warmly welcome Nat. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I work across sites that cover 10 hectares of Auckland's core. Our studio has in the last 3 years built 24 projects covering 4 city blocks in downtown Britomart. We have invented the emergent 4-hectare City Works Depot. We've built new buildings and old buildings and theatres and laboratories and offices and shops and dispensaries of social harm. At some stage, in the midst of assaulting the city, we also made 2 small houses in the countryside. This is one. At the outset of this project, I showed our clients a photo of an old, blackened, cast iron Chinese teapot. I said we wanted to make them houses like this teapot. We wanted to make houses that did not look like buildings. We wanted to make houses that had the silent potency of the unfamiliar. We wanted abstraction and tension and fear and love and hope and darkness and humility and the scent of burnt wood and anything but indoor-outdoor fucking flow. I'm not going to talk any longer about houses. I just wanted you to see this one because it's complicit in the modernist revolution that wiped away 3,000 years of near-linear evolution in art. It ate it, it destroyed it, it threw it away. In place of that slaughtered history, modernism has laid before us unprecedented creative freedom. It is our collective responsibility to continually and aggressively exploit that freedom and lead this culture boldly into its own future. In the face of your own extraordinary lives in this city, I don't know what else to offer you but my own. I'm not an architect, but I am trying to make architecture. I'm the first generation of my family born outside of Canterbury. My name is Nat Cheshire. I share a studio with 25 people who I love. We trained as architects. Now we design city blocks and teaspoons and edit menus and build websites and send light fittings to Italy. I've been gathering my thoughts on the transfiguration of our own city and the life our small studio has lived in the service of that transfiguration. I hope that some of these thoughts might have some relevance to the great fight that now rages for this city, for your city. This is what I think. Our own was once a city without hope. Auckland had suffered too long from diffusion. This tiny population was smeared like thin, rank butter over a huge isthmus. Auckland was a city in title alone. In truth, it was barely a collection of villages. In truth, I didn't believe in it any more than you did. You despised us. Maybe still do. We despised ourselves. I was, and maybe I still am, just another fucking Aucklander. In the void left by hope lives selfishness. Throughout my childhood, it was selfishness that defined power in our city. I grew up watching our city tear itself to pieces. I grew up the son of one of the bravest architects our city had ever produced, Actually, your city produced him. I clambered over building sites and followed my dad around with a toy hammer and a baby-sized tool belt. Yet somehow, growing up, I never thought what he and his comrades did was anything other than absurd and in any case impossibly painful. These few giants still swung clubs at this vile city and roared unwavering in its face. But we were too broken to see what they were starting, or to believe that it was anything other than martyrdom. They were superheroes without an audience. That was our failure and not theirs. By the time I finished school, almost everybody I knew had left this place. Ours was once a city without hope. I stayed. I stayed because I believed that upon the shoulders of those giants, ours might be the first generation to effect global change from this little place at the bottom of the world. Motivated mainly by rage and disdain, I tried to join their fight in the darkness, a child among angry men. I put on bow ties like knights put on armor. I started a studio of 2 people in my parents' bedroom. During the day I studied, during the night I worked. I was 19. I averaged $4.65 an hour over 4 years. I published nothing, I affected few. But I learned. I worked furiously. I changed the lives of those for whom I worked. I believe that to be worth the pain and the exhaustion. I still do. At 23, I closed my own office to join my father's new studio. I was terrified of working in his shadow. But I was exhilarated at the chance to wrestle with the opportunities through which he daily stalked. Our studio was 6 people. For 5 years I worked for Pip. He and his team fought long and hard to shape a master plan for Britomart. I struggled to keep up. I took comfort in an apartment I made that sought to make manifest the clarity I thought at that time existed in architecture, if only architecture might listen to art. I pursued the delights of our craft and reeled at the chaotic exhilaration of building. I pursued abstraction and reduction and the energies of crystalline geometry and the bodily discomfort of an impossible object. Then one day I got a phone call. It wasn't for me. It was lunchtime. Everybody else was out. I didn't eat lunch. In the absence of the grown-ups, I raced down the hill and met a couple of Britomart's development managers who were trying to corral an unbelievably hungry kid from Milton. This kid wanted to make a big bar in the wrecked hulk of an old building. He could barely keep his fucking eyeballs still. He didn't care about hope or darkness or romanticism or giants or children. He just cared about delivering the extraordinary to a city bloated on banality. He'd made a tiny bar in a little alley in Christchurch. Now he thought he could just punch a hole through Auckland. And these really powerful people were taking him seriously. Collectively, these looked like people who would yet have the strength and positioning to redefine everything about the way we work in this city. They cared nothing for process or professionalism or authority. It wasn't like these things were being ignored, it was just like for them these things did not even exist. All that mattered was the extraordinary future. It seemed worth sacrificing almost everything to try and keep up. I came back the next morning with charcoal in my hands. I worked through the day and through the night and tore his ideas to pieces and put them back together on a mountain of butcher's paper. We met on Tuesday morning. He said, "Okay, fine, I'll think about it, but here's this hotel idea that I've been working on. My architect doesn't get it. He keeps feeding me shit, and there's no money, but you seem hungry, and maybe you want to have a go at it." I asked him to sign a fee letter that would pay us at least if he went ahead and built our idea. He said no. He wrote me a letter back that said in 100-point font, "Nat, I will not fuck you over." That was all. He started work. We ate lunch in his restaurant on Friday. I handed him a book we had made. It told a story about a new kind of hotel. He closed the book, said I'd not been fucking around. I had not. I had not slept since Tuesday. He got me whiskey and some chips. At 3 o'clock he phoned. I just pitched our hotel to the owner of Britomart. He fucking loves it. He wants to open before the World Cup. Within an hour, the owner of Britomart called me himself. By 5 o'clock, I stood in a boardroom with a man who built an entire city in Texas from the desert up. We looked together out the window at 9 blocks of downtown Auckland. He owned all of them. The man asked me what I had been doing. I sensed that while the hotel had got me in the door, the real game was still in the old buildings. I looked out that window with him and tried to crystallize an image of our dream. I wanted him to see what we saw. I left nothing behind. I talked about what I believed Britomart had become, what I believed its most radiant future might yet be, and then the ways in which this kid from Milton, with the shaky eyes, might help us stride into that future. He laughed and said, "Okay, let's build it." He looked at me funny. I guess he had already decided before I arrived. I felt small and exhilarated and a little bit sick. I left. We built it. I was 28. And our studio was 10 people. We made a bar that became a bar and a restaurant, then became 5 stories and 2 buildings of simultaneous adaptive transformation. In their pursuit, I almost lost everything. I had always worked hard. Now I was meeting people who worked even harder. I lived in the centre of the city. I would wake and leave for work each day at 4. I picked my way through nightclub queues and vomit to work in the darkness before the phone rang. Often the phone rang anyway, and I would not even make it as far as the studio. The site consumed me for days at a time. All I had ever made was an apartment. Now I roamed an enormous dripping hulk, wielding millions of dollars worth of material and hard, brave labour. I barely slept. At the apex of my delirium, I found myself in an airplane toilet, measuring the width of the toilet room with my shoes and vomiting at the imminently built errors that my discoveries implied. I just didn't know anything. In that toilet, I discovered for the first time my own cliff edge. I discovered later that if you know where that cliff edge is, you can use all of the space leading up to it all of the time. I gleefully abused this knowledge. I still do. This is architecture. Architecture is art taken from the cotton wool of the gallery where even a light switch is an intrusion, and dragged out into the most violent and chaotic commercial space I know of. Architecture is standing in the middle of a dark studio at 3 a.m, weeping with rage at your own ineptitude and fear, and carrying on anyway in order that that art might survive. So we just built. We built like crazy in this rabbit warren of old brick and pigeon shit and timber harder than steel. We tore the thing apart with diggers and made a bar out of decadence and decay in equal measures. We set billion-dollar handmade glass mosaics amongst crumbling brick and filthy plaster. We made bars out of old bolt boxes and the kindling rippings from our waste timber. We turned underwater rubbish dumps into luxury. This was my first bar. We called it 1885. Simultaneously, we made a restaurant out of second-hand chairs and even worse plaster and this idea we had called Humble Special. It was an idea that sought to unlock the free potentials of aged, distressed, and humble objects by choreographing their decay, then setting them in tensile opposition with small moments of soft refinement. We wrote a script for going to the bathroom. A small door behind the bar opens onto a common service stair. At its bottom, a compressed, subterranean corridor of crumbling concrete and brick, punctuated by 3 small doors. The darkness is lifted only intermittently by fireproof mining lights. We figured that, if it was bad, we might as well make it really bad. We wanted fear reassured only a little. There could only be a jewel at the end of a journey like this. So we made a jewel at the end. So it's my first restaurant. During the day, I spilled out drawings, spewed all over the walls, and fought furiously to get permission to trade. Liquor licenses are harder than buildings. During the night, I oiled steel bar stools and hung speakers and painted cabinetry and scraped the walls above Hanoi's door to reveal this one tiny little bit of Vietnamese green that by divine providence lay between layers 3 and 4 and 100 years of accumulated beige. Then one night we opened the doors. It was a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Outside was a wasteland of gravel. There was no PR, no advertising, no sign outside the door, no reviews. There was not yet really any Britomart. By 8 o'clock that Friday, there was a wait list of 100. People turned up at Hanoi and said, 2 hours? Okay, put me on that list. Then 1885 opened. Grown women queued the length of 2 blocks to fight their way in. They drank and fought and fucked and vomited all over our building. We huddled around computer screens in a back room coat cupboard, watching in awe as $1,000 scrolled by every minute. We reeled at the potential of what that might signal of our once tired city. All of a sudden, Auckland looked really, really hungry. Reverse immigration flooded us with globally sophisticated denizens who had left cities like Tokyo and Manhattan and New York and Shanghai. They brought with them an appetite for the life they had left behind. We realized in those first few nights that if you committed totally to delivering quality of experience above all other things, the city would eat you alive. It was like we had just opened a door and the whole world had turned inside out through its aperture. Over and over, all people said was, "This does not feel like my city." People imagined that in here, they were somewhere else. What was most exciting was that we were changing not just what the city was, but what it imagined it might yet become. Imagination is hope. Hope is all we needed. In a situation like this, nothing is a sensible alternative to action. Theory and premeditation and care and professionalism must be thrown aside in favour of commitment, speed, and the stomach to survive in the violence that speed demands of you. In this jet stream, building feels more like street fighting than architecture. We did not stop or breathe or sleep. We felt like we had discovered a kind of loophole in the matrix of the city. We set out to take the city back as fast as we could. We made bars out of old car parks and shipping containers and the surrounding dereliction. Barely 5 weeks in, I got another phone call. It was my birthday. This kid from Milton said, "Happy birthday. To commemorate the event, I had a baby. You have to finish building my bar." I turned up to site at 4 a.m. the next morning. I became a contractor. I did not leave for a month. Somehow, I kept my part of the studio going. I wielded a nail gun and led a sight of seasoned men and drunken bar girls waiting for a finished bar so they could serve liquor rather than drive power tools. I drove cherry pickers down empty Britomart streets at 3 a.m. I lied to the authorities. I lied so badly that when an inspector turned his back, I turned and sprinted into 1885, down to the basement, and locked myself in a toilet cubicle lest he discover the extent of my deception and imprison me on the spot. I finished his bar. We raced on. We built a whole block from refrigeration panels and the perforated metalwork of some guys who make fire trucks. We made them from first briefing to the switching on of the last LED in barely 12 weeks. We made restaurants out of poison and butcher's paper and the snakes and saints and skulls and upturned buckets and the sensuality of women with flowers in their hair. We made offices out of mathematics and shops out of apple carts. We made salons out of fur and flowers. We made buildings out of paint and walls out of 2,000 smashed Chinese plates. We hired maitre d's and picked flowers and lit candles and wrote menus and drove cherry pickers and wrote speeches and made guest lists for billionaires. We tore at the professional boundaries of architecture, transgressing fields and abandoning professionalism outright. Hopped up on adrenaline and fear, felt like we were changing the whole city. By the time of the World Cup, we had 9 live construction sites in Britomart alone. If you were still in this game at the end, you could barely breathe. The air felt on fire. Every Friday night, to try and stay alive, we would build ourselves a bar. 6 of us kids from different worlds, all fighting and failing side by side. Broken furniture and stolen candles and an iPhone with the volume turned up. Broken furniture and stolen candles and an iPhone with the volume turned up. Near pitch black, a tiny loading dock, the floor, the pit of a lift shaft, the bar. A wheelbarrow wheeled through back corridors into heaving nightclub. Barrow filled with ice and champagne and liquor and glasses and sugar. Food run from the club and passed through a hatch. Cigars and furs and rags and fear and exhaustion. Our own drunken love. We called this Icto. I know the owner. I learned in Icto something important about loneliness. I made a diagram of it. It's an asterisk. The wedges between each line define a discipline. Architect, restaurateur, developer, physicist, painter, builder, everything. The broad tails of those wedges are filled with a huge mass of each discipline's practitioners. Their sharp, hardened tips define instead the rarefied space at the leading edge of each art. The harder you pursue that sharpened tip, the fewer those who can properly know you. But here, at the center of this diagram, the fewest people are crammed together the tightest. Here, despite the incongruence of our respective arts, we find ourselves far closer to each other than to the regular body of our own professions. Here in the centre, there is camaraderie to be found in a mutual loneliness. I turned 30, our studio was 18 people. It's over, the World Cup, we didn't really know it was on. We stopped making Icto. Then we made it one last time and put a till in it and opened it and killed it. It was never the same. We kept racing. A real estate agent introduced me to 2 really unusual car parking operators. I had helped her in Britomart. They had bought a big car park with some old sheds on it. They loved Britomart. The car park just happened to comprise 4 hectares of central city, placed and scaled so as to bridge in one move the gulf between the central city and its nearest inner suburb. They described their hopes. It was the Thursday before Easter. I sat up all Easter and wrote everything I knew about the city and how it could be changed and why they should believe in that change. I sent it to them on Tuesday morning. I wrote 4,000 words. The last 80 read, "We won't fuck around with urban design and arrows and axes. We will just outline the big gains to be made now and then how these might be refined as the project develops. Then let's just start. We will be setting out to make a project so successful that it energizes the city as a whole and so carefully balanced that it maintains that energy for decades more. We think CityWorks Depot has this potential. I'll see you in an hour." They're car parking operators. They deal in tow trucks and wheel clamping. I think, though, that they loved it. They bit down hard. We started immediately. They did not know what drawings were. We remade the CityWorks Depot in less time than it took us to get approval from a corporate client for a chair we had chosen them. There was an extraordinary day when it just happened. I walked into a meeting with the owners. We sat and talked for several hours trying to manage a contractor who was in crisis. While we were in there, a publication called Denizen published its weekly blog. We had these now. It included a brief review of Al Brown's new bagel shop out the front. I got up and walked out of the meeting. I couldn't get out of the door. It was like 1,000 people had arrived in an hour. There were queues 50 long, reaching out almost every door, not just ours. People covered every surface we had made to sit on, and everything else too. Where once there were a few solitary guys in beards pushing motorbikes around, now there heaved silk dresses and bespectacled hipster kids and the corporate refugees of the offices that lined the ridges above us. This place had hit its tipping point. It had both critical mass and bold, unfamiliar quality. The city had noticed. It literally happened in an hour. It hasn't stopped. The City Works depot now exists. I still find that kind of shocking. We invented it. We didn't design it. We invented it. The difference for City Works depot was that Britomart already existed. Britomart had become the monster against which not just this place, but everything that we were involved in now seemed to be measured. It had changed the way we understood the potential of our own city. It only took one project. We turned back to Britomart now and said we needed to do to its days what we had already done to its night. This is all we had to do for a year. We needed to make it as good at 1 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon as it was at 1 a.m. on a Saturday morning. We started by fixing what we had already made. From there, we started an idea for a whole city block that became pavilions, that became a garden restaurant, that became a laneway, that became the aggregation of 4 rubbish rooms into a tiny, unwieldy new tenancy, that became a scripted mathematical tool, that became a single net surface absorbing every retarded undulation of the stupid tenancy into a singular fluid world, that became a parametrically defined system of contraction and dilation relative to its proximity to the transparency of windows and the opacity of those awful fireboard walls, that became a fractal system derived from the Arabic mathematics of Musharabi, that became 1,200 panels individually cut directly from the computers of our studio. That became an ambition to deliver a completely immersive environment of transportative power within these little rubbish rooms. That became the manifestation of our delicate cave-like dreams into a fingertip-scaled sensitivity that we hoped would quietly scream our commitment to the reconciliation of technology and humanity, and above all make people feel deeply, bewilderingly excited in the otherwise familiar backstreets of their own metropolis. By now our studio was 24 people. It was hard to tell what all of them were doing. We'd become so committed to the idea of the total environment that people were as likely to be dyeing fabric or stitching handbags as they were to be drawing buildings. Enough. In 10 more years, we'll be looking back on this short period and not believe that so much could possibly have changed so fast. If you've been to Auckland recently, think back 4 years. There was no Britomart, no Wynyard Quarter, no Imperial Lane, no City Works Depot, no Osborne Lane, no Ponsonby Central, no Elliott or Lawn or Fort Streets shared space, no Q Theatre, no City Art Gallery. If you haven't been to Auckland recently, that's pretty much all there is. There was barely an Auckland at all. I've learnt 3 things about the mechanism of this kind of radical change. Firstly, that the simultaneous convergence of commercial benevolence, political mania, and cultural sophistication is the spark plug. A few bold entrepreneurs pursuing quality collided with each other in our city and competed in a model of development that looked more like benevolence than self-interest. But it was still capitalism. A city council had just consolidated a long, impotent hydra into a single beast, with the scale to make bold plans, the resources to execute them, and the nous to stay out of the way of a good thing. A global financial crisis flooded the country with globally brilliant denizens fresh from Tokyo and New York, prepared to suffer almost anything to either produce or consume the quality of experience that they had left behind. All three of these things happened at exactly the same time. Their collision generated demand, supply, and the political nous to recognize and keep clear of the beautiful mess that would ensue. Their collision sparked an extraordinary environment of change. Secondly, the accelerant of that change was the discovery of high-speed, small-step, organic growth as an alternative to the arrogance of the master plan. You could see it first in our culture of food and clothing. As our lives grew increasingly technologized, we reflexed. We demanded a counterbalance of archaic detail, hand-sourced provenance, and personal participation. The city modelled its change on those same appetites. Every scrap of change in our town has been organic. Every one. Revisit that earlier list and is defined without exceptions by projects that have been grown or grafted rather than made. Every new thing is now made from an old thing. Britomart, Wynyard Quarter, Imperial Lane, all of them. This is an age of improvisation. We are now running out of old things. The third thing, if you can get this far, if you can get to the start line, the whole system becomes self-perpetuating. Extraordinary new spaces now open so quickly we cannot keep pace. They are so strong that they do not cannibalize each other, but reinforce each other. They generate a culture of competitive brilliance. In the face of that culture, the weak and the uncommitted simply get slaughtered. It is remorseless. It is a necessity. After 3 decades living in a city of weakness, the city that you despised, I have no pity for those fallen. We live in a small place in a time where smallness is no longer a constraint, but instead a conditioner for massive change. There are few places on earth one might change so radically, so fast as ours. Almost none of them are in the West. We are politically and economically stable, geographically isolated, geologically beautiful, socially sophisticated, unencumbered by deep history, and as a consequence nimble enough to turn on a dime. This is the opposite of the thunderous momentum of beautiful global cities like Manhattan. Trying to change cities of that scale and resolution is like trying to steer an aircraft carrier into the future. We live instead in a place in which almost everything is enormously more malleable than it appears. We live in a place where the actions of the individual can yet affect the lives of the whole. We must not waste this. It should be dawning on us that at this moment of our maturation, our great opportunity is not the resolution of national identity that has so burdened this last century of art in New Zealand. The idea of New Zealandness in art must die. We must be past this already. Fantails are birds and ferns are plants and rivers are water and farmers kill sheep so we can eat their bodies. It's not that these things don't matter. They do, a lot. It's just that there's so much that matters even more. What matters most now is only the work in its own terms. Abandon the metaphors. We need to understand that the work we make here must not just be good here. It must be good everywhere. Our opportunity now is to engineer a reflexive cultural imperialism, using our little cities as the launch pads from which to reach into the bowels of those global cities that have the hubris to think that they are already finished. In place of that bigger world's history and bigness and wealth, we have now laid before us astonishing freedom. It is our collective responsibility to continually and aggressively exploit that freedom and lead the world into its own future. For the first time in my life, though, I do not know what that future ought to look like. this not knowing, this is all I might ever have hoped for. In the absence of knowledge, I have found hope. I will walk out of this little room empty, because an hour ago it meant everything to be able to come down here and speak to you. And now it's spent, it feels like nothing, and all I want is to work again. I guess I have given you everything I have. I hope it is worth something to you. I know your situation is different from mine. I know that the big plays here are controlled by big players. I know that at face value this bigness is the enemy of the organic city. If you are an agent of that bigness, tear down the pretensions of your own profession. Reject the hubris of architecture. Reject the arrogance of architecture. Reject the singular, grand master plan. For no plan deserves to survive first contact with the enemy. Replace composition with curation. Replace hardware with software. Replace specification with invention. Understand that the best big things are made entirely from small things. Understand that in circumstances such as ours, our greatest responsibility is to find, seduce, and secure the most extraordinary of operators, showing concern only for the scale and quality of their ambitions and the hunger with which they pursue those ambitions, and then to empower those operators to do the best work of their lives. It's their work that counts. We are their servants. All of architecture's self-absorbed aspirations must bend to this task, because the beauty of building is nothing compared to the beauty of use. You just have to believe that you can carry architecture with you. If you are small, if you are excluded from this bigness because, like me, you do not have sufficient experience in large-scale mixed-use development, if that exclusion leaves you impotent, if you have abandoned hope that you might ever help put this once great little city back on its feet, then observe Auckland's own fight. Everything I have shown you has emerged from the speed and potency of the humble fit-out. Almost everything above the street front is irrelevant. Leave the big kids to play with their curtain walls and screening devices and master plans, for soon they will be done. Find yourself instead a kid from Milton with shaky eyes and a hunger bigger than yours. Believe in all that she believes in and fight for everything she dreams of. Build with her a whole new world in the precious few meters you have been afforded together. Leave no tiny opportunity untouched. And begin taking your city back, inch by inch, teaspoon by teaspoon, table by table, bar by bar, street by street. Take this city back. Today you will walk back out into that city. Believe with conviction that your most exquisite present will be created solely from the depths of your hunger for the future. The urgency of this potential ought make you burn with lustful impatience. Yours is a city and a country and a culture in the thick of radical transformation. I believe without reservation that the scale and speed and appetites of our time make this the best place on earth from which to tear an entire culture to pieces and rebuild it. All I fear now is not having enough adrenaline or blood or luck to contribute. I used to fear that we might not be good enough. I used to fear that we might never have the opportunity to find out. I do not fear this anymore. The world outside these doors has changed. We have changed. The exquisite future is real. It is possible. It exists. It's ours. Do not rest. Thank you.